right, this is our third section in our 10 sessions on meditation, spirituality, and self-development. And you guys came out and amidst all this cold, I hope that I can warm you up with a little information. I'll do my very best. We're going to continue our exploration of the whole science of meditation and spiritual practice, drawing the distinctions where appropriate from those practiced at the level of religion. Now, I want to say, as always, that my remarks related to religion are not in any shape, form, or fashion to be understood as demeaning religion. Religion is a necessary stage of development. It has a positive effect. It gives people mind a turn toward at least God and some higher thing, and therefore we are to appreciate that. It is a great preparation for spiritual life. The downfall, if any, is to become trapped at that level, you see. But we certainly don't want to minimize it. Today we want to talk about actually entering onto the path. We want to begin today to talk about some of the basic preparation necessary for the path. Much like today, you see, you are out here on this cold, blistering, wintry day. And there's all kinds of obstacles that has to be overcome, just in the pursuit of knowledge. But it is the same kind of perseverance, the same kind of thing that is required on the path. And just as when weather gets bad, it impacts on people's ability to get around and things of that nature, and that's understood. Only a few people will be able to get around on these days under these kind of conditions. The same is the case on the path. Even those who come toward the path, you will find that the number of people who are able to survive traveling the path is few. Hence the path that very often be referred to as the razor's edge. It's like walking the edge of a razor, the mystics say. It's such a, you can't even call that a line, can you? It's such a thin thing between failure and success. And why is that? Because the path requires us to go on increasingly overcoming obstacles. The path is strewn with all kinds of obstacles. There's not just the obstacles of weather, that's just a small one, but of family, of jobs, of all of the ups and downs of life. All of these things have to be somehow conquered. Those of us who are practitioners of meditation know that each day we are fighting literally a battle to get up and do our meditation, because on a daily basis so many things arise that could easily serve as a justification for us missing our spiritual practices, you see. And hence the necessity for a long preparation that will enable us to withstand and overcome all these various obstacles. So today we're going to talk about some of the fundamental things that have to be a part of that process of preparation. Now, this is a big subject, and so I'm going to try to avoid getting long-winded here or getting too metaphysical on you. But at the same time, I want to make sure that we all come away from these workshops with a decent understanding of what is required of us on the mystical path. And remember, I very often refer to this as the path of the masters. And I do so because this science of spiritual practice that I advocate is a system of spiritual practice that has been taught by all of the great masters, irrespective of their time, culture, country, etc. When we explore the heart of all of these great religions, these great traditions, we will find the presence of a mystic who has taught the same science of spiritual development. The most important thing is what we call bhavana. Bhavana means attitude. The attitude has to be in place. You see, if one does not have the right attitude toward one's spiritual practices, then those spiritual practices will soon evaporate. Now, last time, in the first session, I think we began to talk a little bit about the kind of commitment and attitude that is required to succeed on the path. So our attitude has to be there, you see. This attitude is formed out of certain fundamental commitments, certain fundamental relationships. Now, we began to talk a little bit last time about karma yoga, about bhakti yoga, about raja yoga, about jnana yoga, right? These are the four fundamental forms of yoga that has come out of India, right? And serve as the foundation of a lot of their spiritual systems and practices. But I want you to understand, by no means have they been confined to India, right? These systems have been practiced from time immemorial. But of those systems, the most classic system of yoga has been codified by Patanjali. Patanjali was a yogi that lived about 200 BC or so. And what Patanjali did was he codified and collected most of the science of the practice of yoga that informed the Vedas and the Upanishads and that whole African Indian tradition. And he called those the Yoga Sutras. The teachings of the yoga, the science of yoga. And so today what I'm going to do, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the preparations for yoga as advocated by Patanjali, because I find that they're pretty inclusive of all the paths. Whether one is going to approach this science of self-realization through the path of karma yoga or bhakti yoga or raj yoga or jnana yoga, that this constitutes a fundamental preparation. And so we're going to talk about the 8 stages of development according to Patanjali, and we'll try to relate those as best we can to our needs for purposes of these classes. There's first, even before we go into that, there's certain things that you already have heard discussed about preparation. One is diet, isn't it? Right? The vegetarian diet and things of that nature. And we're going to come back and go into that in a big way. I don't know if we'll do it in this session, but perhaps in the next session. The first thing that Patanjali talks about in his Yoga Sutras, as far as preparation for spiritual practice is concerned, is what he called yamas. Yamas means the general rules that govern our relationships to people in the world. So there are certain disciplines, because disciple comes from the same word as discipline. To be a disciple means to be disciplined. And so we have to have a certain degree of discipline. And so there are certain rules of discipline, therefore, that prepares us to be disciples on any path that leads toward spirituality. And so these yamas are 5 in kind. The first one is ahimsa. Ahimsa basically means harmlessness. What the mystics are saying is that we have to develop a kind of tenderness. We have to develop a kind of attitude where we are not so quick to hurt people, but to say people, even animals. We have to somehow or another elevate ourselves to a level to develop a kind of attitude of harmlessness, compassion, gentleness, lovingness, kindness. These qualities have to be developed in us as an aid to help us make maximum spiritual progress. Vegetarianism, in fact, would follow somewhere in that category of the practice of harmlessness. You see. So ahimsa then, harmlessness, becomes one of the disciplines that we have to begin to practice as it relates to people in the world. The next one is called brahmacharya. Brahmacharya means, see how do we say this? It means a kind of celibacy, a kind of non-sensualness. Brahmacharya means that we have to somehow try to rise above the domination of our senses, particularly the sexual thing. You see? Particularly the sexual thing. So the mystics have recommended that we begin to practice this kind of restraint as a conscious effort, with the understanding that it will enable us to better practice our spiritual system. So brahmacharya, this kind of discipline in our sexuality. We should not be out here on the path, and then you're involved in all kind of sexual liaisons. The senses are running absolutely wild. This is not going to help you on the path. You see, this is not going to help you on the path. It definitely needs to be brought into control, some degree of control. The next one is called, how do I call this thing? You will have to just bear with me. I am trying to process this stuff into some kind of meaningful schemata. Satya. Satya. Satya means truthfulness. Right? Truthfulness. Now this is hard. To be truthful with the world. Very difficult. Very difficult. This causes us to have some direct encounter with our ego mythology. When we went through the anger sessions, we talked a lot about how truth sets us free. We talked about the kind of courage that is necessary to be truthful in terms of our relationship to the people in the world. And this is very hard to do, incidentally. But the mystics have said that we have to achieve a certain degree of truthfulness in terms of our relationship with the people and our relationship with the world. And that causes us to very often encounter a lot of our own ego mythology. You see. And that's not easy. It's not easy. We'll be able to discuss these things as much as we like. We have a small group today, and that in some respect is excellent because we can make it as tailor-made as possible. So satya, this truthfulness, is one of the yamas that Patanjali, as well as so many other mystics, have suggested that we consciously strive to incorporate into our day-to-day life. The next one is astilya. This means basically non, how do you say it, non-theft, stealing. Not just stealing on a material level, but stealing in every sense of the word, you see. Even as it relates to your time, there are certain times that we have that we steal away from others, you see. Non-stealing meaning that not to deprive others of things that naturally we're obligated to share with them, give to them. To not to take anything in any shape, form, or fashion that does not belong or is not requested, etc. Most of these moral principles you will find embedded in almost all religions. And that's why I say that religions play a useful role. But most religions very seldom will go beyond the yamas. Basically, they are yama. Most religion is a way of preparing people morally and ethically to travel a spiritual path. The only unfortunate thing is that they never go beyond morality. And remember, morality is not the same as spirituality. Morality is an aid, it is a preparation, it is a prelude, it is a preliminary stage. And that is the only fallacy of religions, that they don't go beyond the yamas. But almost all of the ethical teachings and almost all religions will talk about this non-stealing, this non-theft. The fifth part of the yama is called aparigrappa. That means non-greed, non-covetousness. It means to get ourselves into a position where we are able to become more content. It's the conscious and deliberate development of content. Now, none of these are easy. None of these are easy. But these are the kinds of mental preparation that we have to make in our life if we wish to be successful on the path. See? To begin to develop all of these as best we can. And I say as best we can because are we going to be perfect? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But the more we can make an effort to begin to practice these yamas, these fundamental moral things, the more success we will have on the spiritual path as it relates to our spiritual practices. So these becomes the yamas. Are there any questions on the yamas while we have them up there? And the role that they play in spiritual practice. Why it is necessary for us to develop these kinds of attitudes, these kind of bhavanas toward people in the world. Because we have to be very clear on these things. We have to be very clear on these things. And remember, our practice of ahimsa cannot be based upon whether anybody is practicing ahimsa toward us. You see, our practice of brahmacharya doesn't mean that everybody around us has to be brahmacharya. You see, our non-stealing is not based on whether we're stolen from. You see, and these have to be personal goals that you set for yourself in a spiritual sense to that we must move forward. And it's a great discipline. But this is just the first step on the path. This is the first limb on the tree of yoga that these mystics are talking about. This non-greed, you see, this ability to be content. So many of our problems that we experience in life is the direct result of our inability to be content. It almost has like a negative connotation in the West. Whoever heard of anybody in the Western world trying to be content? Our whole thing is to try to never be satisfied. And we've achieved it, finally. In America, it is taught, don't ever be satisfied with anything. And we're not satisfied with anything. And so we suffer as a nation, as a people of discontent. Discontent. So we have to kind of consciously work to achieve all of that. And incidentally, all of these spiritual aims then involve us struggling with our egos. That's the common feature in all of this here. It causes us to struggle with our ego mythology. And that's very difficult. This becomes the scope of most of the world religions. It's just in achieving these fundamental spiritual abilities. We perhaps will come back to these again and again as we go along. So these are yamas, the general disciplines that we must try to incorporate in our relationships with people and the world. One of the other reasons for that, if you will notice, is that it minimizes karma. It minimizes karma. Don't forget that we all are in this world and we all therefore have to act. You don't have any choice. And because we have to act, there will always be consequences from our actions. So religion seeks to teach us how to act in such a way that it minimizes the creation of negative karma. Moses gave his 10 commandments to the world, Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, Lord Krishna, his teachings to Arjuna. All of these mystics gave the world really a system of morality and ethics with the ideal that it will minimize the kind of negative karma that you will experience. You harm somebody, you will be harmed. Now this is the law. Therefore practice ahimsa. Be compassionate, be gentle, be sweet. I used to say that that your words should be so mellow. You know what I mean? That it just melts, you see. We have to practice that because if we harm, we will be harmed. If we steal, we will be stolen from, right? And so all of these practices of the yamas as it relates to the world is to also help us reduce the load of negative karma that we all are created down on this level of creation. The second set of practices is called niyamas. Niyamas relate to the rules and discipline as they pertain to yourself. That's interesting. There are certain rules, regulations, and disciplines that we have to practice within the context of our relationship to other people. And then there are certain rules and regulations that you have to practice within the context to yourself. Your relationship to your own self. And the first one was called Sacha. Sacha means purity. Sacha means cleanliness. And again, these are very poor translations. But Sacha means kind of purity. The ideal is to keep ourselves pure, clean. Not just physically, but even clean thoughts in our mind. For instance, we should not give ourselves over to just pondering on all of these unclean thoughts. Unclean thoughts are going to come. Bound to. But we should not just, give them just free reign of our own minds. You see. In this culture here, we're exposed to so much on TV, so much in the media, so much sex, so much crime, so much violence. Now, it's impossible. You see. Some sexual thing is going to be thrown at you, right? Don't Don't contemplate it. Don't hold it in mind. Stop thinking about it. Get it out of your mind. Now, you can't stop these advertisers. They're so, ubiquitous. They're everywhere. They got women with their breasts hanging out, moving all up and down the street. And I'm sure that there's men that having the equivalent effect on women out there. Some of these men look better than women. But the point is that there's so much impure negative things that are bombarding us mentally every single day. And just as if you were walking down the street and we step into some dog shit, now you're not just going to leave it on yourself. You're going to try to wash it off of yourself, aren't you? If you fall and dirt fall on, you're going to wash yourself. There is this natural tendency to try to keep ourselves physically clean. And the mystics are saying that this satya should be practiced across the entire spectrum of your being. Try not only stay clean physically, but try to stay clean sensually, emotionally, psychologically, mentally. Try to keep yourself clean, you see, of all of the things that are going on around you that will pollute you see. People are talking. Now, they're gossiping. Now, in that gossip, it's full of very negative, horrible things. Try not to allow that stuff to go into you. If it gets into you, try to clean it, try to wash it out of you. And how do we wash it out of us? It's through our japa, through our symbol, through meditation. Meditation is a way of cleansing ourselves. In fact, that's one of the most important things about meditation. When we get up in the morning time, before we go out into the world, I used to say the very first thing that you should do in the morning is meditate. The very first thing. That should be the priority. Because you're preparing yourself, right? Just as we get up and we brush our teeth and comb our hair and put on our clothes and all these other things to prepare ourselves to go out into the world. Maharaj used to always say that you should first prepare your mind to go out into the world. That's the thing you should really be getting together before you go out there, right? To create this protective atmosphere that allows you to go through the day, right, and be able to ward off the innumerable impurities that you will encounter just in the course of going through life, you see. And so our meditation then should be seen as something very essential, you see, to maintaining this cleanness, to keep this mind of ours clean. Because God knows by the end of the day, there's going to be so much dust, so much garbage that your mind will encounter. It's bound to get filthy. And some of us, our minds are just, full of filth. Full of, we've read so many Playboys, we've seen so many X-rated films, we've seen so many good-looking men pass by or good-looking women, and naturally the mind contemplates on that because the senses want those things. The senses long for those things, right? And so naturally that's going to be on it. And so Patanjali, speaking on behalf of all of the great mystics, that we need to practice this kind of satya, this kind of conscious and deliberate effort to keep our minds clean as possible. Now you're in this world, are you going to be perfectly clean? Nope. But we should try to keep ourselves mentally and spiritually as clean as possible. Which means, of course, that now we don't put nothing in ourselves, right? We're going to collect enough stuff just in contact with people. We need not put any more of this garbage in ourselves, right? So, in that sense, one of the disciplines that we have to practice in relationship to ourself is sancha. The next one is called santosha. Santosha means tranquility. It also means something like contentment. Yeah. Tranquility. We have to remain calm. Again, notice that all of this makes sense when you understand the objective of meditation. The objective of meditation is to withdraw the attention from the world, to quiet the mind down. Right? So anything that aids us in doing that constitutes discipline on the path. It's a part of our sadhana. So tranquility, we should try to keep ourselves calm. Try to keep yourself calm. You see how we get ourselves all worked up? What are you working yourself up about? Right? And before long, we find we done got ourselves all worked up, foam coming out our mouth. We saw that in anger workshop, right? And working in anger, we could see how us putting a particular spin on our perception of another person's action trigger our own anger, and then we sit there and we get that anger all worked up in us, and we about to have a heart attack. We have deprived and destroyed our own tranquility. So the mystics say that we should try to achieve santosh as much as possible. We try to keep ourselves as calm, as tranquil as possible. And remember, it is the tranquil, calm mind that accomplishes the most, even in the worldly sense. Minds that are very agitated, that have lost their calmness, their serenity, are very ineffective minds. Those kind of minds cannot accomplish anything because, one, they can't concentrate. And without concentration, there's no way to generate energy. And all work requires energy. So simply by losing our tranquility, giving up our calmness, we reduce our effectiveness across the entire spectrum. And so the saints, mystics, sages, and seers have reminded us that we should make Satosha a goal. We should try to remain calm, tranquil, serene. And in that way, we're able to do everything much, much, much better. You see? And again, the most powerful means of doing that, of course, is meditation. Right? Meditation. Meditation helps us to achieve this kind of inner tranquility and calmness. Again, the importance, therefore, of starting the day off with meditation. Because you come out into the world not calm. Now, if you're standing there in front of the mirror, you're brushing your teeth, combing your hair, and your mind, by the time you get through putting your makeup, it's done whack you out. I mean, when you hit traffic, you already are on the verge of having a heart attack. It is interesting, they say, that the majority of people who die of heart attacks in this culture die on a Monday morning on the way to work. Isn't that interesting? Now they haven't even gotten to work yet. And they done got themselves so upset they done had a heart attack. Right? No tranquility. So, but when we practice our meditation in the morning time, you see, that tranquility lingers throughout the day, which makes us very more effective as an employee or as an employer, you see. It makes us more effective in every kind of work that we do. So santosha, that is a kind of discipline that we should practice in relationship to ourselves, because ain't nobody upsetting you but you. Now you have to be clear about that. Nobody upsets you but you. You do that to yourself. And how do you do it? By the spin that you put on the stuff. Is that right? We do that. So if you all upset, you all agitated, you foaming at the mouth, you've done that to yourself. You're pinching yourself. Now this is nonsense. You see, calm down, do some meditation, do a little simran. You see how lucky we are, those of us who have had the great opportunity to be initiated into the Sutra, yoga, the science of the soul that our ancestors have passed down to us. We're very lucky because we have a method now that we can just consciously turn on to produce tranquility. You see, a lot of times people who don't have that, they're just out there on the limb. They gotta wait till they can get to a bar and have 12 drinks, you understand, right? Before they can calm down, you see. They're just stuck out there on the limb. We can calm ourselves down. We're gonna become uncalm, but that's another issue, but we can calm ourselves down. So santosha, the practice of conscious, deliberate creation of tranquility in ourselves, is a great aid for succeeding on the spiritual path. The third part of niyamas is called tapas. Tapasya. Basically, it means austerity. Now, it's kind of hard to talk about austerities. Those of you who are familiar with the practices of yoga in some cultures, where you will see these holy men and these yogis, and they will be sitting, some of them on a day like today in Tibet, go there, you will find some yogis sitting in this kind of freezing weather with nothing, just a little dhoti, sitting cross-legged in a cave somewhere, right? Practicing tapas. Tapas means that conquering this body. Tapas means being in control of your body, not your body in control of you. And there are great yogis that have come down, you see, through antiquity that were masters of this. Now, of course, when this tapas goes to an extreme, everything can become dangerous when going to an extreme. I am simply sharing with you the ideal that originally lurked behind the practice of these austerities and these tapas, right? The idea was to conquer, well, for spirit to conquer flesh. So some of these yogis would stand on one leg, you see, or then you find they've been standing on one leg for years, one leg. Again, practicing austerity, building mind over body. Because so many of our problems arise because of our lack of mastery over our bodies. Just our physical body. And by body I mean to include even the senses in that body. We have to also understand that. Tapas also involve the disciplining of senses. Right? One of the things I always tell you all is that when you sit in meditation, try not to scratch. And you say, Bhagwan, that's impossible. I'm saying, this is a little tapasa. This is small. Just don't scratch. Right? Have at least this much mind over body. You see? But these great yogis went to much greater extent. And they learned how to transcend the inclemencies of weather. Right? And it made no difference how cold it got. And it made no difference how hot it got. They disciplined themselves through tapasas. So tapasa builds will. It builds strength. It gives you the ability to master a lot of the things. And we find that very useful in life and indispensable on the path. Now, if you're going to be getting up out of your meditation at the first visit of a little pain, now you're not going to accomplish much because there's going to be some pain. And you need to have some ability to practice tapasa. You're going to have to do that as tapas. That you're going to have to go through that. You know, you're going to have to make the body sit in spite of the pain. You have to be in charge. You calling the shots, not this body. Who's running who? Is the body running you or are you running the body? Which is it? You see? And at some point in time, we're going to have to take mastery of this thing. Right? Again, I'm not talking about an extreme situation. Some of these yogis are going to the extremes with this thing. Some don't take any food. They won't even give this body no food at all. They'll make it go, just stop. You just wait. I'll feed you when I'm ready. Just when you're about to die. Then I'll put a, and then just a few grains of rice in your mouth. You don't tell me when to eat. I tell you when to eat. You know, it is a different attitude toward the body that most of us have, isn't it? We're used to doing, if this body even think about eating, right? we can get that food, right? we don't want this body to suffer at all. But the body don't give a damn how much you suffer. The body see a beautiful woman go by, and the body say, oh, I think I need to have some sex. And the body go have some sex. And now you suffered inside for years for violating your fidelity. For years, you're full of guilt. Because the body said, I need to have a little sex. Or the body said, I need to get drunk. I need to just get relaxed out. Let me get drunk. Because it gets drunk, and then it kills some innocent child with it, while driving home from the bar. And then for years, we suffer. That's what happens when the body is in control. The body is nothing but a conglomeration of our senses. And our senses are all associated with objects. Senses run toward objects. Eyes run toward beautiful things to see. In fact, it only want to see pretty stuff. It don't want to see any ugly stuff. The ears want to hear pleasant things. The tongue want to taste pleasant things. This is how it is. And so Maharaji used to always say that the soul is a slave of the mind is a slave of the senses, and the senses is a slave of the objects of the world. So ultimately, those who have not practiced tapasya remain slaves to the objects and the things of the world. They are at the farthermost distance from suffering. Some object come along, it triggers your senses move toward it, it pulls the mind and the soul with it. And the poor soul now has to suffer all of the consequences. The mystic said, you must practice some tapasya. The spirit of tapasya must arise in you. That is your personal discipline that you have to practice as it relates to you. If you want to be successful. As we go into these niyamas now, you can begin to see where we're leaving religion far away now. Right? Very few religions flow over into just the personal disciplines. Right? There are no tapasya required, or very little. You see, very little. So tapasya is a big thing that we have to try to start disciplining ourselves. And remember, is any of this easy? No. Now please, none of this is easy. But what we're saying is that this is what the goal has to be. This is what you have to work toward. If you, in fact, expect to get any results from your spiritual efforts. Spiritual efforts that are not following the constraints of these disciplines do not produce results. So some tapasya has to be incorporated into your sadhana as it relates to you personally. You see. For some, vegetarianism is a big tapasya. Vegetarianism causes you to come into some kind of tapasya. Because the tongue tastes, you don't eat this pork chop. It tastes good. Never mind what your intellect says. Damn your intellect. It's what the tongue says. Right? Tapasya means stability to overcome that. And let this tongue, you suffer. It's the capacity to suffer. And will there be a lot of suffering in my life? Bet your last dollar. Now, this yogi sitting up in Tibet is bound to develop a lot of siddhi, a lot of power when he comes down out of that cave. He can sit in a cave naked in this kind of blistering weather. That's going to make him very powerful in some aspect. Because why? He has a great capacity to suffer. We can't handle it. You see? So it makes them stronger than us. Right? Their will is more powerful than ours. Some have done tapasya where they have the tapasya of poverty. No money. Now, you know how terrifying that is. I mean, to go outside without, at least $50, $60, we got to have some way to put our hand. There have been gentlemen and women who have practiced tapasya as it relates to money. They have not touched money at all. They accumulate no wealth whatsoever. Right? Again, this is a bit extreme, but I want you to understand that this tapasya is this kind of austerity that we have to incorporate in our life across a wide spectrum of things. Now that yogi who have developed tapasya as it relates to having possession, now what can you do with this kind of person? Nothing. Way more powerful than this. You see. Those of you who have read Siddhartha, you know that Siddhartha says that he's got three things. He developed the ability to be patient, right? To think, right? To suffer. It's a great boon. So tapasya there is one of them. The fourth discipline that we have to practice within the context of our relationship to ourselves personally. It's called Swadhyaya. Swadhyana. Swadhyana means study. You must study. We must study. In fact, a day should not go by when you're not studying. Like you do meditation, you should study. We should study first, obviously, ourselves. Study ourselves. This is a part of the discipline as it relates to us. All of these great Bibles and Qurans and all of this literature that we got, this should be studied. And not haphazardly. I mean, we should go deep into these kind of things. Because if you don't hear the teachings, you see, you won't understand the teachings. We have to hear the teaching. We have to expose our intellects to the teachings as much as we possibly can. You see, understand the teachings as deeply as we possibly can. You see, if we ever hope to practice the teachings. So this Swadhyana is very important as one of the niyamas, as one of the spiritual disciplines that we have to practice in relationship to ourselves. And I don't mean just scholasticism. I mean actual study. You got to study. Maharaji used to always teach us, he says that you should study something from the body every day. Every day. Not, you should study something from the teachings every single day. Every single day. Why? It creates that mood. It creates that bhavana. It keeps that attitude right. You see. Sometimes the mind is so restless, you see, and you have to remind it again and again, you see, of the futility of what it is that is so restless about, right? You have to bring it out of this restlessness through understanding sometimes. So this study, this daily practice of study is very, very important, that we practice that discipline. That's something that we do in relationship to ourselves, where we reflect deeply upon the teachings. We living in this age and time, we're so lucky because we got so much information that ancient seekers, they did not have. They couldn't go and read no Upanishad somewhere. They could not go and just read all these great pieces of literature the bookstores are just full of this stuff now. I mean, it's so much good stuff here, you see. We are not to just accumulate information. Please don't misconfuse this Swadhyana with just a collection of information. This is not just a collection of information. This is study. This is absorbing. This is eating. This is drinking. This is pondering. This is reflection. This is implementation, right? It's a very different thing. It's like a kind of food. And the mind has to be given this. It's a great aid on the path. In fact, sometimes this absence of this here can become one's whole downfall. Ignorance. So we have to study. We have to have a personal program of study. And once we have set this program into practice, it becomes very habituated then. It's not so hard anymore. In fact, you feel uneasy when you don't have your period of study. And in spite of all these years, the habit in me is so powerful that I still every day spend a minimum of an hour, hour and a half studying. Every day. You see, it's no effort anymore. You see. And if I don't study, then it feels like something is missing during that day. So this Swadhyana, like meditation, when you don't do it, you feel undressed. You see, one of the things that has happened to me is, since we located over here, and I was intending to share with Bhagwan yesterday. I've fallen into a trap of doing meditation over here, messing around with you people. And now, every day, you see, if I don't come here, you see, and do some meditation, I'm all out of whack, and I was going to complain to him because this was his idea, right? Now, whether you're here or not, you see, I have to come here every day now. You don't know how inconvenient that is, right? But that quickly, you see, the thing set in, right? And you just feel something is wrong, something is out of kilter. So your swadhyana, the studying, you have to have that, right? And what is it you study? Study the teachings. Study the teachings. There's so many books. That whole shelf is full of books right there. Dorothy and Pam and everybody's worked so hard to organize all this stuff. Satharaj made all these tapes. We have so much stuff here. I mean, we have a wide range of material for that express purpose, to enable you to really study. You should form study groups. If you can't study every day, at least study once a week. Study. But you must study. That's a very important part of the disciplines that you have to practice on a personal level. For a fifth one, discipline that we have to practice as it relates to ourselves. It's called Ishvara Pranidhana. And again, I am apologizing to you for all this Sanskrit nonsense. It's just that I'm limited as an individual here. And I don't really know how to talk about this without reverting to the Sanskrit. But it has a literal translation as devotion. Devotion. You must practice devotion on a daily basis. Now, devotion and meditation, you see, are often very confused, right? You hear the mystic talk a lot of times. You must do your meditation with devotion. Devotion has more to do with your bhavana, your attitude, right? Devotion is what pranidhani now means basically devotion to God. Devotion to God. Last week we had a couple of Muslim brothers here, Saluddin, and we were talking a little bit about Islam, and we were talking also in conjunction about the Bhakti Yoga, Kamara Yoga. And as always, again, I fell into one of these strange spells because whenever I think about the Prophet, and I think about Islam, and I think about that beauty of submission, that submitting to God, you see? And I just become full of that feeling of devotion. I submit. You see? I submit. Not my will, thy will. I mean, it's just a tremendous this devotion. And this has to be consciously acquired by each and every one of us. We have to have a certain level of devotion and worship to this God that is inside of us. We have to make that a part. We have to get that in our mind, you see. We have to come into this submission. I submit. I submit. See, this is a practice that is aimed to somehow help dissolve this ego that we are in, this state of this ego, this kind of arrogance that we have assumed that we are somehow more wise than that which is inside of us. You see? That devotion, that I submit. Very often in the mornings when I do my meditation, if you saw me, I look like a Muslim because I am bowing right? Like a Muslim, but thinking like a Buddhist, I am thinking, like the Buddhists when they go into their temples. There's the Buddhist statements, like in Islam, there's La ilaha illallah. You know all these things, you're better than I do. In Buddhism, there's also these statements of declarations, right? And one of them is that they would say that Buddham Saran Gachamani. I take refuge in the feet of Buddha. It means I submit to Buddha. You see, of course I'm not submit. I submit to my own Buddha. But the point is that once you're in that spirit, the attitude is there. You submit, I submit, I bear witness that there is no other way to achieve liberation other than through meditation. I submit to that. You see, I bear witness to that, and I submit. Because you've been trying to figure out if there's other ways to make spiritual progress other than meditation. You see? I submit there is no other way to make progress other than meditation. Submit to that. This is Ishvara Pranidhana. Submission. You see? We talked about the three faiths last time. Faith in the oneself, faith in the Guru, faith in the teachings, right? That's a part of Ishvara Pranidhana. That's a part of this devotion. You see? I submit to the teaching. That these teachings are accurate. I submit. I bow. I give in to that. So you have to have this kind of devotion. You see? The meditation is to be done out of this kind of devotion. You see? If you don't have devotion, then your meditation is dry. Have you noticed? It's dry. You don't want to do it. Oh, I don't feel like getting up this morning. It's so hard. Damn, I got to do this stuff. I'm not getting any. You see? That's because, Dorothy, you recognize this, Dorothy? Yeah. Okay, so I'm not alone. At least there's one other who suffers with me. When there's an absence of this kind of devotion, right, then we feel that, right? Because there's no devotion. Meditation is dry. Yeah. Because there's no devotion. You see, there's no slumber. There's no submission, you see. And hence it's a test. And remember, without this Ishvara Pranidhana, meditation will be very, very difficult. Very, very difficult for us. You see? In fact, every step on the path will be very difficult for us when this is absent. In fact, without devotion to this God. And remember, when I say God, I'm talking about God that is in you. Remember, I define an atheist as a person who does not believe in the existence of God in the deep recesses of their own being. Right? And when there is not devotion to that God that is within you, you see, every step that you take on this path will be very difficult. It will be like pulling teeth. Everything that you do. You see, we talked earlier about those yamas, this ahimsa and all these other things. You can't do none of that, right? You can't practice any of that. It's going to be difficult. So these then constitute the first two limbs on this tree of yoga, on this system of spiritual practices taught by the mystics. Now we go to the next. Remember, yama, the practice of disciplines in terms of our relationship to the world and its people. We have to have a certain personal level of morality, ethics, and moral behavior in relationship to other people. We're not to take nothing from them. You understand? We are to restrict our greed, so that we don't exploit them, you see. We are not to harm and hurt them through the practice of ahimsa, and so forth and so on. To try to be as truthful with them as possible, you see. These are disciplines that we have to incorporate into our lives. And these niyamas we just finished talking about. And now the third thing As we move now, and remember, now we're moving, remember, we're moving deeper and deeper into abhyasa, deeper and deeper into sadhana as we make these moves. Remember, yamas and niyamas are at the peripheral. It's on the outermost edges of sadhana. We're moving into the heart of sadhana as we go through this system. The next one is asana. Asana means basically, the word, it means seat actually. But we talk about postures, things of that nature. But actually, technically under the term asana, we have hop yoga. Falls even under there. Asana means really a position. It's taking a position, you see. To take a position. Like we have to take a stand somewhere. Right? At some point in your life, you're going to have to decide, are you going to be a mystic or are you not going to be a mystic? Now you decide. Now remember, and you decide. No one is to decide this for you. Right? I'm not to decide it for you. Your wife, your husband, your mother, your brother, your sister. Nobody is to decide that to you. But at some point in our life, we have to take a stand. We have to take a position. We have to take a seat. Similarly, then, in the practice of spiritual science, part of it begins with our asana, our postures, our seat that we take to do the meditation in. That whole philosophy of sitting still, motionless, not giving in to the minor discomforts of the body. All of that arises out of that same kind of attitude of taking a stand. The Buddha, you see. The story says that Buddha, after he left his palace, abandoned his wife, renounced his power and authority, disappointed his father, who had groomed this boy from birth to take over the kingdom. The man was becoming old. He had put so much hope in this son of his, right? Had surrounded him with so much luxury, so much education. And when this Buddha abandoned the palace and the king and his wife and his son, all the things that we want, we dying to get our hands on, this Buddha abandoned it and went on his search for this knowledge of the inner self. And he practiced all kinds of tapasanas, all kinds of austerities, all kinds of yoga. He put himself through all kinds of discipline. Sometime living off of a grain of rice a day. I mean, he was a great tapas yogi. Probably one of the greatest. He exceeded even his masters in those schools, you see. He mastered so many forms of yoga. And after 6 years of this, nothing had happened. Nothing. The story says that Buddha became depressed. Wouldn't you? 6 years. And mastering everything, he would go to this guru, and this guru would initiate him into the tapasya of resisting cold. And Buddha would have mastered it. So much so now you can set him in some snow, and through pranayama yoga now he can melt the snow. I mean, he mastered these things, but he did not experience the self. Yeah, he got powers, but he didn't get on to the path to get power. He got onto the path to have the experience of himself. And this was missing in all of these early episodes. And the story said that Buddha simply became frustrated, simply became depressed, and had done so much tapas, had practiced so many austerity, that this body here was just whacked. You know, it was nothing but skin and bones. You could see it's real. He had practiced fasting to the extreme. And he decided, well, life is not worth living if I cannot have this experience of the deeper self inside. Not like us. Buddha was not like you, was not like me. We play with this thing. Buddha, for him, to have the experience of the self was life and death, saying, Lord, if I cannot have the experience of the self, then this thing don't make any difference to me. Already he was able to leave his wealth and his family. We can't do that. You can't. The thought of you leaving your family just scares you to death. Buddha walked away. So we mustn't confuse ourselves. So we shouldn't somehow think, oh, he couldn't have been so much, he wanted to commit suicide. No, Buddha was way beyond this from day one. But this is how these kind of rare souls are, right? Either they have the experience of the higher self inside that we call God, or take the life. Forget it. Life is not worth living. One of the great Sufi mystics, Hafez, Khwaja Hafez, in one of his poems he writes, Lord, he said, if you're not going to let me see you, then you might as well cut these eyes out of my head. Because what good are these eyes if I can't see you? Mirabai says, what good are these ears if I can't hear you? This stuff is no good. I don't need nobody if in the body I can't experience you. Buddha was out of that tradition. So he made it to the edge of the river. And he threw himself into the river, but he was so weak he couldn't even drown his damn self, right? He couldn't even throw himself far enough in the water, right? He was just able to jump just a little, so he fell there, right? And later on, he finally found enough strength to climb and crawl out of the little shallow water, right? So bad, he can't even drown it, so he ain't got enough energy to drown himself. And so he said, well, let me lean up against that tree there. Get my rest back. And so when I get my rest, I'm killing myself. Right? And so Buddha sat like a stone under the boat tree. And before the night ended, he was Buddha. You see? That's the story. And why he took a position. He says, well, no sense in me going to this water and drowning myself. He said, I will take this pasta, this asana, this padmasana. I will sit, tie myself up here. And either I go in or I'll sit here and die. You have to understand it was different. When Buddha said in meditation, Buddha said, either I'm going in or I'm going to die. Period. You see the difference between the Buddha and us? Do you see that? Right? Now, I have to touch his feet. You understand? Look at that. Buddha sat in his posture. You said in your posture this morning. the very first sign of pain you got, you were ready to get up. Buddha said, I'm sitting here until I die. All right? Or I'm going in, one or the other. And he went in because for him, it was life and death. This is asana. Take a posture, take a position. You see, this is the attitude, the bhavana that goes. When you sit, sit. Now, I've taken away this hour and a half. Body, I don't care what you do. Oh, I'm going to die. Then die. Damn it. Go ahead. We ain't going nowhere. Oh, I'm going to pass out. Good. We're going to pass out then. You passed out from drinking. Why can't you pass out from medic? I don't see the problem, right? Right? And then you said you had a good time, right? I got so high, man. I passed out. You go around and you brag about that the next day. Well, pass out meditating. What's wrong with it? You see? It hurts? Okay, it hurts. So just accept. All right, we're going to sit here. Or I may get crippled. Okay, I'll be crippled then. But we're going to sit here. You see, you have to take a firm posture on this path. Not just in terms of the sitting meditation, but also in terms on our attitudes toward meditation. So this is asana, right? This is asana. And there's many postures that you can take. The mystics talk about some 84 asanas, 84 different postures, attitude. So there's a lot of scope here. Hatha yoga, asana has another aspect as it relates to hatha yoga, that is to produce health in the body. The aim and objective of hatha yoga is to maximize physical health. Because this body got to be strong. To sit for an hour and a half or 2 hours, that takes strength. You can't do that if you're out of shape. You think you can do that if you're out of shape? No way. You see, it takes strength. And so Hatha Yoga has been a science of building health in the body, building strength in the body, to get the physical body in shape to do meditation, to prepare for the practices of meditation. So as a result of that, in Hatha Yoga, you'll find them going through all of these 84 asanas, all these different postures, all these different poses, positions. The ideal, again, being to strengthen this body, get this thing tough, get it right, increase maximum health, and etc., etc., etc. So asana now becomes another stage of preparation for those of us who are going to contemplate becoming mystics. who want to go through this curriculum, you see, this science that produces Buddhas, that produces Jesus, that produces Muhammad's, that produces Mahavirs and the Tahoe. Those of us who have submit to this thing, then we have to go through this stage and develop some capacity to do a science. Right? I'm on Bilal, I'm on time, I'm on schedule. Okay. We'll take a little break and then we'll come back at 2 o'clock. Our discussion and continue overviewing the preliminary training suggested by Patanjali for maximizing the results of all our spiritual efforts. Please bear in mind that these limbs of yoga, as they are called, are taken from the classical training that one undergoes in the practice of Raja Yoga. So these particular disciplines that we're talking about technically belong in the category of called Raja Yoga that we talked a little bit about last time. In the upcoming sessions, we're going to revisit some more of these yogas again, and also we're going to talk about Sutra Yoga. Sutra Yoga is the yoga that we actually advocate here at the House of Ra. And therefore I want to take an opportunity while we're discussing these various spiritual systems to draw your attention to some of the theoretical and philosophical background material you will be needing in order to appreciate the Sutra Yoga that is the yoga that you are practicing yourself. Bear in mind that some of you have not been given the full techniques, and I will make sure that that is done as we go through these sessions so that you will avail yourself of the opportunity to practice and to learn theory at the same time. With that said, we're going to return now to the fourth limb on these limbs of yoga that has come down to us through antiquity, again as an aid to help prepare us for making maximum spiritual progress. The next limb is the limb that they are called pranayama. Pranayama. In fact, there's a whole yoga that has grown up around pranayama. We call it pranayama yoga. Pranayama means really this is the disciplining of breath. Yama, as you can clearly see, means discipline. Prana means breath. So pranayama means the disciplining of breath. And I don't even know if the word breath is correct. We should call it probably the Ilan Batal. The Ilan Batal meaning, of course, the life in the form of breath. In the body, our life is linked directly with breathing. So many of the other needs of the body, you can sort of postpone. And you can go X amount of days without food, X amount of days without water and rest and sunshine and so forth and so on, but you can hardly go a few minutes without breath. So the breath then becomes really the foundation of life. And we all know that in the cosmologies of most religion, they talk about how the Creator breathed life into man. So this breathing then, and the science of breath, and the science of the management of breath, is a very great key in aid in the practice of meditation. It is one of the most misunderstood and abused approach toward meditation. Here in the West, there are so many teachers, so many schools that are involving their students in this pranayama yoga. Now this pranayama yoga can be a very, very dangerous practice. So as you listen to our discussion of this here, I must warn you that I don't advocate any pranayama yoga. Pranayama yoga for most people can result in very disastrous consequences. The holding and restraining of breath can cause the lungs to collapse. It can cause all kinds of mental imbalances. If the breath, has a lot to do with the chemistry in the body, the blood and all these other things. So as you regulate your breathing, you are regulating the manner in which you are oxidizing yourself, and that in turn can result in impacting upon a lot of the other vital systems in the physical body. Pranayama was taught in ancient times under direct guidance of a master, and then only if the aspirant has definitely completed some of the yamas and niyamas that we've talked about. In fact, if there was not already a kind of high moral attainment, then you would not be given any kind of pranayama practice. You see, if there was not already a certain degree of purity in terms of diet, in terms of lifestyles, in terms of the absence of drug, of alcohol, and all these other things, there would be no way in the world that you could successfully undergo any kind of practice of pranayama yoga and escape with your sanity. No teacher would even put you through that process. You would be found unfit and therefore rejected from initiation as such. So pranayama yoga is a very powerful stage discipline to accomplish. Now, in Sutra yoga, automatically one naturally engages in a kind of pranayama yoga. But it's a byproduct. It's a very natural thing. It's not consciously entered in the tongue. So I'm going to talk a little bit about both the upside and the downsides of pranayama yoga so that you may be safely guided through it. As I said before, pranayama means basically the discipline of breathing. And why? Because the source of the mind and the source of breath is the same. There is a direct relationship between your breathing and the speed of thoughts as they flow through consciousness. So the mystics very often say that there's many different ways to approach this problem of selling the mind. If your mind cannot be made still as a result of your concentration, many people, for instance, find that to concentrate the mind, to repeat the Simran, to do the Dhyan, is very, very difficult for them because their minds have been so conditioned to being in a scattered state, and their minds are so impure. By impurity, that we mean it's full of so much extraneous stuff going on in your mind all the time, that for the life of you, you cannot concentrate your mind. The ancients realized that, and they therefore made the path of pranayama available to aid those individuals who cannot concentrate in a direct way. So they taught a system of breath control, because by controlling the rate of breathing and the whole system of how you handle the prana running through the body, you are able to bring the mind into a state of quietude. You can see even on the emotional level, when people are in certain emotional states, you can see that each of these emotional states is accompanied by a certain breathing pattern, right? When you're in a state of anger, you'll notice how the breath is up in the upper part of the chest, and so forth and so on. And even the ordinary breath, there's about 84 different kinds of breath in the body, you see. We're familiar with some of them. Obviously, we know that we all have the ability, like on a cold day like today, to blow into our hands in such a way that they actually warm them up. So we can actually make the air that comes out of the body warm, right? And most of us do that quite naturally and with no spiritual training. We also know how to blow it and make cool breath come out. Cool down hot things. We all do that. Our mother blows and cools the food down to give the children. These are two different kinds of use of the same breath, right? So this breath that we have flowing through our body is used in so many ways. There's a kind of breathing that we do, a kind of breath that helps us evacuate, right? When we go to the washroom, that's air that allows us. It's a way that we use air to actually remove debris from the body. So there's all kinds of ways that the prana plays vital roles in just our day-to-day physiological states of being. The mystics have simply used the prana in such a way to quiet this mind down. And they had discovered the correlation then between how we breathe and the degree of activity that goes on in our mind. The classical terms for that is verities. Verity means the force, waves, the motion of the mind, the things going on in the mind. And by breathing, we're able to control the rate of verities, even the qualities, of course, that rise into the mind. So pranayama then, it consists of 3 different stages. The first one is called purak. Purak is when you take breath in, when you inhale it. Okay? The next stage is called kumbhak. Okay? So in kumbhak this is inhaling. This is holding the breath. And this is the key to pranayama. It's the holding of the breath. And then the third stage of pranayama is what we call risha. And this is exhaling. Now this breathing pattern, this whole system is done sort of with a certain kind of rhythm to it. For instance, in Purak part of the pranayama yoga is that you will hold the breath for a count of 1, then 4, then 2. So that's the kind of meter that you use. When you inhale on 1, then you hold for 4, and then you exhale during the other 2 beats, okay? And the ideal is to build up from this lower cycle until you get to a point where you can do 8, 64, and 32 beats. And this time was controlled by mantras. So when you were doing pranayama yoga, as you're doing one of the mantras, not the mantras that you were given, but you will use a mantra to indicate, you will repeat that mantra as you exhale. Then the next set of mantras will be strung together so that by the time you get through repeating them, you've already gone through the 4 beats. And then the third mantra will be when you exhale. So as you move through those mantras, you see, it will automatically regulate these cycles. And the idea was to slow the breath down. Slow it down. You'll notice that whenever you hold your breath, your mind will stop running. Period.
I was doing it with my meditation, but I didn't know what I was doing.
Yes,
I knew that with my mantras and my breathing. I try to...
Yeah, you don't synchronize because you don't want to be conscious of your breathing.
Right.
That breathing goes on automatically. And that happens to a lot of us because it's such a natural rhythm. One can't help but notice it. And then you start really focusing more on the breathing than you are on your mantra. But if you focus on your mantra, the breathing automatically comes into regulation, right? And that breathing automatically helps slow the mind down. That's the whole ideal about making the body still, and as you relax in the physically, the breath changes. And as you get more and more relaxed in your physical posture, then your breathing starts slowing down. And as your breathing slows down, the mind slows down. So in Sutra yoga, we have really combined the essence of both sciences. I am simply pointing out to you where the whole concept of pranayama yoga originated from, and how pranayama yoga has been used throughout ancient times as an alternative for those individuals who state of vritis is so active that they cannot focus. But I forewarn you that this is not a practice that you should engage in at all. Don't even worry about this. I am just putting this out here so that you will have some information, okay? But fundamentally, that is the whole concept behind pranayama. It is a means of, an indirect means of quieting down the mind. Remember, the aim of all yoga is to render the mind into a state of quietude. Meaning, it's to slow down that flow of thoughts, to slow down the activity of the thoughts that are going on in the mind. And pranayama does that, okay? Now, that's one of the ways in practicing pranayama. The other practice that is associated with pranayama yoga is not so much this system here of the conscious inhaling, holding, and exhaling of breath in certain measured spaces of time. The other approach is what they call vipassana. Vipassana. Because now the mind, the breathing cycle is made the object of your attention. And so in Vipassana, that aspect of pranayama yoga, that we call Vipassana. What one does is one simply pays attention to the breathing. It's the rise and fall of the breathing. One focuses one's attention in on that activity alone. And one of the reasons that the yogis recommended that was because this breathing goes on automatically. Breathing is one of the only processes in the body, in spite of the fact that it's the most vital one, that it can be relegated to your automatic process, or it can be done consciously. It's the only one. All right. So you either can consciously control the rate of your breathing, or you can let it just go on automatic. So if you let it just go on automatic and then observe that automaticity of the breathing process, then that becomes a object, an activity that one can focus one's attention on. The problem with that, of course, is that it keeps you relegated to the body. But if the concentration becomes deep, then it starts quieting the mind down and you start deriving all the benefit. Incidentally, Buddha taught this method of Vipassana. That was his major method of teaching his disciples. To watch the breath and then eventually to watch the mind. Because ultimately, as you watch the breath, and when we say watch the breath, you mean that you begin to trace the breath to its source. What is the source of this breath in the body? And wherever you will find the source of breath, you will also find the source of mind and all thinking. Breathing, breath, prana is arising from the same place in us that your thoughts are also arising. And so Buddha used that insight, and that became one of the cornerstones of his sadhana. Now, of course, this pranayama, this vipassana, this purakumbhak, rishak, all these practices were never done unless the disciple had achieved a certain degree of purity, moral development, achieved their vegetarianism, had some discipline, and more than anything had the right bhavana. You see, whenever a person achieves this, for instance, your diet is all wrong, and your stomach is all messed up, and you go into these long cycle holding the breath, you're going to collapse your lung. All right? It's quite that simple. You see, you start rearranging the oxidation of your blood, and you're going to wind up poisoning yourself. You're killing yourself. You see, why? Because you have not brought your life in your diet and anything into alignment, and the consequences that you will wind up injuring yourself. You see, you won't make any progress as such. So in the West today, we have so many people practicing these exotic breathing, and they really don't have a real good grasp of the historical use of pranayama yoga and the consequences of that occur to those who have not prepared themselves. You just can't read a book and sit down and start doing some, pranayama yoga, right? Thinking that, well, I'm going to avoid doing all the other discipline. I'm just going to breathe myself into enlightenment. You're going to wind up messing yourself up. So pranayama yoga then is one of the fourth limbs on these limbs of yoga. And as I said before, when you are practicing the Sutra yoga that we advocate here at the House of Ra, then as you sit and you keep your attention focused in on your mantra, automatically the breath will change into its own rhythm. You need not consciously waste any energy whatsoever in that at all. But I want you to have knowledge of these things so that you don't fall into, by accident, any kind of wrong practice. So pranayama yoga then is the fourth discipline that has to be looked into for those of us who wish to maximize our results on the spiritual path. Now remember, we are moving deeper and deeper into the heart of Abhyasa. Abhyasa simply means the spiritual practices. As we move deeper and deeper into Abhyasa, you see, we're coming closer and closer to these things. That's why it's so important that you understand, and I can't emphasize it enough, that diet has to be right. The drugs, alcohol, all these things have to come out. And in the next session, we will talk about the gunas and all these other things so that you can begin to see the correlation, you see, of these things. If you're putting a lot of toxins in your body and then you start regulating your breath, And you're reoxidizing, and you're going to just poison yourself. You'll poison your bloodstream, playing around with pranayama and eating pork chops. You understand? It was a fatal combination, right? Can't drink alcohol and do pranayama. You can't do none of this stuff here. You see, the system has got to be clean. You know, the Lord has built into a fail-safe system. You see, no way to get around the system. You may think you will get around the system, but you will not get around the system. All right. And so the fifth discipline now, the fifth stage or limb is called dharana. Dharana means concentration.
Bhagwan,
Yes, sister.
Vipassana.
Vipassana?
Vipassana.
Vipassana is one of the secondary ways and using the breath for concentrating the mind. And in Vipassana, what they do is that you simply use the natural rhythm of breathing as an object to focus attention on. And in a lot of the Buddhist practices, one would simply sit motionless, take the posture, get into a sana, and instead of fixing the mind on the activity of japa, it would simply fix its mind on the activity of breath. It would simply be aware of the breathing going on in the body. And since the breathing will follow a regular rhythm, then you'll start finding yourself coming into a certain rhythm. It's easy to concentrate on because you don't have to think. It's a process that goes on so automatic. And the use of a mantra, see, we come back to this part now, dharana, because you have actually got to set that process into motion, right? With breathing, you don't have to do anything. It just goes on. So sometimes it's a little easier. Hence, dharana is a little higher practice, you see. Dharana means now concentration. Dharana means now that once we have set up the context now for the spiritual practice, now we've done all these things. We've taken care of our yamas. That is, we've gotten ourselves in right relationship to the people and to this world as it relates to our morality, right? We've got our vegetarianism down. We've got our lifestyle down. We avoid sex and all these things under control. We'll achieve the so-called morality of the books of the Bible, of the Quran. These are simply ethical level that any religious teacher would teach. Certainly, it's required for those of us who are on a mystic path. Now we come to dharana. Now we come and enter into the formal practice of concentration. Now I mentioned to all of you the fact that you have to enjoy the distinction between concentration and meditation. They're very different things out there. So here at this level of the abhyasa, at this level of practice, now we want to start really developing the capacity and ability to concentrate. And the only way that one can develop one's ability to concentrate is to practice concentration. There is no other way, you see. So when we have our mantra, you see, whenever the mind drifts from the mantra, whenever the attention goes off the mantra, we must return it. And it will drift again, and we must return it. It'll drift again, and again we must return it. We must go on pulling it back, and that is the only way that one can develop one's ability to concentrate. The thing to bear in mind so that you don't get discouraged is that this mind eventually will get tired of running, believe it or not. That is why the mystics say that you want to achieve the ability to continue this effort uninterrupted for a minimum of an hour and a half. After about an hour and a half, either you're ready to give up or the mind is ready to give up. It's just unfortunate that most of us quit before the mind quit. But there is a point in this constant disciplining where the mind itself begins to settle. So these thoughts are not infinite, all right? They will run out, and you will slowly start sticking to the eye center and sticking to the activity of japa and dhyana, you see. So dharana, therefore, is a necessary stage of development. Now, there have been many systems used to create dharana, to enable us to concentrate. You all know about mantra. So there's mantra yoga, right? That helps also concentrate. And then there are other things. There's objects. Sometimes people use physical objects to concentrate on. You have all understood the role that the nirit and the sutra plays in the whole process of mind concentration. All of that was explained to you at the time of your initiation. So you're able to really appreciate the relationship that these things play to the development of dharana. One of the things that you also have to understand that, one of the unique aspects of Sutra Yoga and this methodology that we advocate here at the House of Ra is that we also use sound. So the sound is sometimes called Shabbat Yoga, because sound is also a means of achieving not concentration and withdrawal. So for those of you who will be receiving the additional part of the meditation practices that we call bhajan, at that time I will go into a lot of more details for you. In any case, Shabbat Yoga is a way of using sound as a means of focusing our attention on for purposes of concentration. This divine self that exists at the center of our being, that we call sound, that we call God, has a sound. Hence, in all of the cosmologies of all of the religion, you hear about in the beginning was the word. After all, a word is nothing but a sound, is it not? When you are thinking, fundamentally, you are listening to sound. These are phonetic sound symbols that you have associated meaning. That is all language is, right? Essentially what we're doing, we're talking to each other here. But fundamentally, all you hear coming out of my mouth are sounds. But they are sounds that we have associated certain meanings with. Therefore, we are able to have some kind of understanding here. But in terms of the pure physics of what's going on, even as we sit here, this is nothing but sound coming out of you, right? And sound that comes back out of you, but meaningful sound. Hence, the self itself has a sound. Why? Because the self is essentially consciousness. God, self, all of these are synonyms for the same reality. And that is energy. All energy produces sound because energy vibrates. Wherever there is vibration, there is sound. So there is a sound. The philosophers in ancient Greece called it the music of the fears. We hear talk like that when we read philosophy, right? So this is the sound current, as we call it. That is, it is that current of sound that is emanating from the Supreme Self, the Supreme Being. And remember, even this terminology that we use when we talk about the Supreme Being, you have to understand that terminology is meaningful only as it relates to us. You have to understand that we oftentimes remain identified with the lowest aspect of our being. The ancestors talk about the fact that we are identified with the Kat level, the physical level, then the Sahu level that makes up the level including the mind. Then there's the Ku and the Eve and all of these other different parts of being. And so the Supreme Being, therefore, is simply a name that the mystics and saints have given to the identification with that highest part of your being. So the Supreme Being is simply the highest part of your own being. When you are just Bhagwan, or you're just Dorothy, or you're just Sat Ra or Pam, you're not a Supreme Being. You're at the lowest part of your being. You're at that personality level. But as we shift our levels of identification to higher and higher parts of our own being, we reach a point where we become identified with that Supreme Being of our reality. You see my point? So this Supreme Being that is called God or Allah or Atman or the Self, right? Whatever you want to call it, it makes no difference. These are just words. Generate a sound. Generates a sound. For those of you who are students of science, we know about the various theories about the origin of the creation. We know about the steady state theory, you know, what the Hindus, mystics have called the Ajata theorem. Won't go into that now. My point is relative to the Big Bang theory, which is the other theory, the competing theory, and that the universe came into being as a result of an explosion of energy. And that sound of the Big Bang, our physicists tell us, is still traveling through the universe, right? The sound of the Big Bang is still reverberating throughout all of the cosmos, right? And that is what radio telescopes and all these other things picks up, right? The sound of the Big Bang. So in some sense, you see, this self that resides at the innermost core of our being is reverberating throughout all of the different layers, covering up and obscuring it. You remember in one of the sessions we talked about the Anamaya Kosa, we talked about the, all of the various sheets that covers the divine self. Well, through each of those sheets, this sound reverberates. Naturally, when that sound is reverberating through each of these sheets, it makes a different pitch, doesn't it? Right? Through the process of Sutra Yoga, we catch and place the attention on the sound of the self. And that sound of the self now allows us to track the source of the self. Much like in the forest, by listening to the whatever sounds of civilization you can hear, you're able to move toward that place, aren't you? Right? By listening. And so by listening to where this sound of the self is originating within this body, we're able to follow it with attention and thereby return to our original state of being. So this is just a brief rational explanation for the practice of Sutra Yoga. But again, these sounds, at least in initial stages, have the same function as the mantra. Mantras themselves are nothing but sounds, aren't they? Right? Ultimately, you see. So by focusing our attention on these mantras, we're able to develop some degree of concentration. And remember, you cannot meditate without first concentrating. Meditation, and we will be talking about that shortly, is after concentration, not before concentration. So hence, there's no way to escape this arduous task of training ourselves in the art of concentration. And remember, the more concentrated we are, the more energy, therefore the more power we have at our disposal. A mind that is not concentrated is a weak mind. That's what we mean by a weak-minded person. That is a person who can't concentrate. That's a person who can't make this, they can't decide. Even to make a decision requires some degree of concentration, some kind of discipline of the mind. So as long as our mind remains scattered, we remain weak-minded people. And a weak mind cannot accomplish anything. What to say of the spiritual path? It can't even accomplish anything in the world. It is fundamentally weak. Weak in the sense that all of the energy, all of your mental energies are diffused. Much like the light in this room is diffused. Now we know that if we could take all of the diffused light in this room, concentrate it into a beam, that becomes a laser. That's all a laser is, right? The condensation of light. But this by condensating this light, turning it into a beam, we're able to cut through steel. Right? So the mind is like that. As long as the powers, the mental powers of the mind is scattered, right? We're ineffective. So we have to gather all of this scattered stuff of the mind, concentrate, and thereby open up the doors to the inner regions, and come back into the discovery of self. So the Rana then is a very important link in the stage of developing the capacity to practice these kinds of spiritual sciences that these mystics and saints are talking about. And remember, unless we develop the ability to do the Rana, you see, then there's no possibility of going very far on the path, right? In fact, you will find that at every point on the path, you're going to need to be developing some kind of dharana. You know, it's just like a thread that just runs through all of the various practices. So there's other things too that we need to say about dharana. I've mentioned to you all at the time of your initiation, we talked in some detail about the fact that this mind of ours has these two activities of thinking and contemplating, or hearing and seeing, or sort of the knitted as we call it, and how each of these modes, function of the mind, has to be engaged in any kind of practice that will result in concentration. So we have to engage both of them. And so I won't spend a lot of time on that. I want to leave some time for your questions comments because we very often don't get a chance to visit this material again. And so if you're going to have some things you need me to go over, I want to leave a little time for that. After dharana now, after we have gotten some concentration, after we've developed the ability to concentrate, remember, we've moved from yama. We've gotten our morality together. We moved to niyama. We've gotten our relationship with ourself together. We've got our self-disciplines now. We've gotten into the asanas now, right? We've taken our postures, our bhavana is right, our everything is right about that. You see, we've gotten into this pranayama and all of that. We know how to take maximum benefit of that. We've gotten to run, we know how to concentrate. We're getting ready now, right? We're getting closer. We're getting closer. Now we enter into dhyana. This is meditation. Okay? All the other 5 steps are nothing but preparation for meditation. And meditation is what? Meditation is the ability to hold attention on any object or any activity with no interruption, meaning no drift, anything, no drift. You see? When concentration is matured, when concentration has become perfected, it turns automatically into meditation. You see my point? And now one simply develops the ability to hold the attention focused, motionless, no movement, no drift, no running into anything, right? Just abiding and strictly in the activity. When one is able to get into that state, when one has been able to successfully withdraw the attention, you see, from all of these practices, right? Then one is ready. Actually, I skipped one, and I should back up. How can I leave this out? I'm going to say a little bit more. Let me say something about that. And let me give you a new number 6. Let's call this 7, 6. Let's call this 5, because I have to say something about this one here. Pratyahara. Pratyahara means the withdrawal of the senses. It's implied, but let's not make it very implicit. Okay? It should have a category of its own. Pratyahara means to withdraw senses. Okay? Just as we've noticed how the mind runs in meditation, yet you can't, the whole concept behind withdrawing inside has to start first with the senses. You have to withdraw the senses first before you can withdraw the mind. Okay? Right? You have to withdraw the senses first. You can't withdraw the mind if you don't withdraw the senses. And if you're sensitive to your meditation, you can feel that. And what is this withdrawal of attention? It means to withdraw the attention from all of these sense pleasures out in this world that is holding our attention out. You see? To withdraw the attention. A lot of the withdrawal of the senses involve the mastery of anger, lust, greed, attachment. We talked about these things here, right? A lot of those negative states are the direct result of the failure to withdraw the senses. So when we sit in meditation, even to get able to meditate, we have to withdraw the senses. What is it that is filling the body in pain? You see, sense. You sense it. Withdraw that sensing, all right? That is distracted by the noise. That's hearing. The sense of hearing is distracted, right? You have to withdraw that whole sense in. When the legs are hurting, it's the sense of feeling that is right. Draw it in, like a tortoise draws its head in a shell. That's how we have to draw in, right? So whenever these senses are still not withdrawn, whenever we have not pulled these senses inward, right, then it becomes very hard to practice dharana. We can't get concentrated. That is the biggest obstacle to concentration, all right? And so it's a stage in itself. And so we have to practice that. Again, that is the whole purpose of the yamas and the niyamas, is to help us to discipline these senses, right? Discipline. So perhaps I'll say something about them later on. But now, of course, after pratyahara, then dharana, now, of course, we're talking about dhyana or meditation. So this ability to concentrate, this ability to focus attention on the object of choice or the activity of choice with no interruption whatsoever is what constitutes meditation. And it is in this ability to hold attention unmoved, unshaken, solid, that produces the experiences of bliss that is associated with meditation. You see, the joy and all of those things. All those experiences are the direct result of achieving this perfection of concentration. When the mind is and the attention is not allowed to drift into the world, then what is there to make you miserable? You've been able to withdraw your attention completely off this world, this body, your problems, everything. And what is left is nothing but bliss, pure, unadulterated bliss, peace. And it is the same kind of peace you experience in deep sleep, except that you fully awake. There's the difference. They call it Jagrat Sasuti, right? Wakeful sleep. Strange terminology, but it accurately describes the state. That kind of peace that you feel when you had that deep, deep sleep, when you wake up in the morning and say, man, I slept good last night. We all have that, right? That good feeling that I was well rested and all of that, and I feel great. That feeling is had consciously. You see, you adhere in that state in meditation. And why do we adhere in that state of meditation? Because we've been able to successfully hold the attention outside of all of these other extraneous activities going on mentally, in the physical, and out in our world. That state is called meditation. That is the achievement of the jnana. And that is a necessary stage of development on this path. The eighth final stage is what they call samadhi. Now, I don't know how to translate this thing here, other than just a state of perpetual peace, I suppose. Bliss. Samadhi occurs now when in meditation we have developed the ability to hold the attention uninterrupted, fixed on an object. In samadhi, there's two types. The first kind of samadhi is called savikalpa. Savikalpa samadhi. That means samadhi with object. Remember, we've been able to come into a state where we're able to hold the attention on that object with no wavering, right? All that exists now is the subject and the object. And that's a form of savikalpa samadhi. It's got an object there, right? Normally when we, and in that state of samadhi, you have to be able to have that object. Then there's what they call nirvi kalpa samadhi. That's with no object. There comes a point in the meditation now where you even drop the activity. It drops. And all that is left is the subject. It's a strange state. I don't have words to try to communicate to you what that experience is like. But what happens is that it's like concentrating. You're using an object to help you get concentrated. Then once you're concentrated, you remove the object and you don't lose your concentration. Now you're just concentrating. You're in that state. And everything you do is done with that concentration. Now if you walk, it's 100% concentration. If you talk, it's 100%. Whatever you do, you're in that perpetual state of concentration. You need not struggle through this, bringing the mind into concentration and all of that. Once you've achieved it, it becomes an inherent state. You become intense. Do you understand what I'm saying? I hope this makes sense to you. It's like using a ladder to climb to the roof. Now, once I get to the roof, I can kick the ladder away, right? I've already arrived at the roof. I can't get no higher than that. All right. Samadhi is sort of like that, but now you kick away even the activity that brought you into the state of meditation. You just inhere in this state of meditation, and it never goes anywhere. Now these three states, Jagrata, right, Swapna, and Susuti, these three states of mind, you witness them. You become a resident in what they call the state of Turiya, the fourth state. You see. just constant, unmoving, unchanging. Those are the kind of words that they've used to describe that state of God realization everything. The unmoved movement, right? Don't go nowhere. Continuously exist. So this briefly then covers the 8 limbs of yoga, classically speaking, that was codified by Patanjali, but that really underlies the foundation of most yogic approach to this whole business of God realization. Now we've covered a lot of stuff today, and I know it's going to take you a little while to process all of this here. So let's have what remaining time we have. I don't think Satrada has much more time left there, so
couple of minutes.
So let's be done with the camera, I guess, huh? There's nothing we can do, so we're going to have to record the rest of this on our minds. So if there's any thing that we need to go over, make sure you get a good grasp of that. That's the whole function of these workshops, these sessions. You're going through all of this effort today and things is to come here and yes, sister.
What's a good method to use to help you withdraw the senses?
Well, the first thing that we do, we want to minimize all of the distractions, things that pull our senses out. So we begin with lifestyles. You see, one of the best things that we have to do is to follow the kind of curriculum that Patanjali and so many of these mystics have talked about. That we have to bring our lifestyle into a certain. You see, the mystics always say, you know, when we're weak, we got to acknowledge that. We can't go in and expose ourselves to certain things. You see, if you got a weakness for women, then stay away from it. You got a weakness for men, stay away from it. You see, right? I mean, you have to start trying to deal realistically with the situation. The mystics also said one of the best ways, however, Dorothy, to bring these senses in control is to regulate your diet. Right? The foundation of most sadhanas can find their roots in the practice of managing 3 things: food, speech, and sleep. That's really strange. Sleep. Yeah. Food, the saying goes, eat less, sleep less, talk less. That becomes the foundation that you can build any sadhana on. And why do we say food? Well, you have to understand something. Food affects your mind, not just your body, right? You are literally what you eat, literally, okay? And food, like everything else, reflects what we call the 3 gunas. Gunas. I don't know how to translate gunas. I guess maybe force or attributes, something like that. And let me put them up here what they are. There are 3 gunas, what they call the Sato guna or Sattvic. There is the Rajo guna, or what they call Rajistic or Rajas. And then there's the Tamo guna, what they call Tamasic. Everything in creation is influenced by these 3 forces, are made out of a combination of these 3 fundamental forces. The Sattva guna is the tendency to be in a state of harmony, balance. What our ancestors call ma'at. Right? Things come into harmony. Rajaguna or Rajistic is the tendency toward activity. Okay? And Tamaguna is inertia, the tendency to rest. These are actually the attributes of energy. fundamentally. You see, physics sometimes is a better model to understand these things. All energy will move through these three states. Either the energy is at rest, or the energy is active, or it's a balance between inaction and inertia. That's what Sattvic is, a middle space, right? All energy is like that. Now, if you subscribe to the understanding then that fundamentally we are energy, fundamentally, you see, then you can appreciate these attributes, right? And everything therefore have these three attributes, including food. There are certain food that you eat that will create inertia in you, not only physically but mentally, will make you lazy.